So the learning outcomes of the session today are, first of all, to highlight the potential biases in scholarly information and use strategies to mitigate issues of bias, to understand what grey literature is and how to search for it, to apply additional advanced searching techniques to improve your search, to translate your search strategy to use in different databases, to evaluate and test your search strategy, and construct the search methods text. So we're going to do our best to cover all of this. We may need to do some slightly shorter parts throughout some of the activities if we're short of time, because there's quite a lot packed into this session. Okay. So I'm going to hand over to Sally now, who's going to kind of talk through a few points on the post-session work from last week.
Thanks, Tanya. So yeah, thanks to everybody who put their search strategies on the Padlet. We've had quite a few come in over the weekend, or late on Friday. So we haven't had a chance to give comments on those, but we will have a look at them after the session. And if you're finding the Padlet not accessible, please just do email your search strategy through to us, and we can give you comments that way. But just from looking at the ones that came in earlier last week, just to pick up on a few things. But just before I do that, please do pop in the chat box if you had any sort of key issues, or you had any specific questions you wanted to ask us, or just generally how you found that experience. There's quite a few comments on the Padlet saying that people found it really useful actually to just sit down and do this. So hopefully you did find it useful. But yes, please do put any specific questions or issues in the chat while I'm just talking briefly about the ones that I did look at. So the ones that I looked at, they're all really good. I think just pulling out a couple of common themes that came across. I think just make sure that you do try to start broad when you first start doing your search strategies. A few of you had quite a few concepts in your search, which I felt that maybe you could combine some of those concepts using or you could maybe take out some of those concepts to begin with, because if you go straight in there with a really narrow search with lots of different concepts, there is a little bit of a risk of maybe missing out on some relevant research. So we always advise start broad, start with maybe fewer concepts and see what you find, and then if you're finding your search is finding loads and loads of irrelevant results, then you might go, okay, I do need to add in this concept on. So yeah, just remember to try and start broad. A couple of you were doing some really good keyword searches, which I felt would benefit from using proximity searching. So remember last week we spoke about keyword searching, and you can search for two words next to each other, and that will search for a specific phrase. But to widen out, to broaden your search a little bit, if it's relevant, you can search for those words near to each other using proximity. And I thought in some instances it would benefit from using proximity. So just an example, if you're searching for papers about patient satisfaction, you can search for those words together and you will find relevant papers. But if you search for those words near to each other, you might find papers that might talk about the satisfaction of patients, so that the words are in a slightly different order and not right next to each other. So if you put patient ADJ3 satisfaction, as we showed you last week in Medline, it will search for those words within 3 words of each other. So just make sure you go through your keywords list, have a look at those search terms. Are there any that you could use proximity? And just the final comment is just remember to use subject headings. I think most of you just put your keywords in your search plan, which is absolutely fine, but hopefully you will then go into the databases and add in some subject headings and try and find those subject headings and combine them with your keywords. But yes, overall really good, and we'll have a look after today's session and try and give those search strategies that have been uploaded some feedback. Okay, so if no one else has any comments or questions about that, we'll move on. But please do add any to the chat that you think of. I'm really happy to help or answer any questions. If you haven't uploaded your search strategy yet, it's not too late. Do upload it, and Tanya and I will look this week. I can't promise it'll be after today's session. It might be towards the end of this week that we put comments on there. But please, put it on there if you would like comments. Okay, we're going to move on now to thinking about bias in scholarly information. And hopefully you've been thinking possibly about bias within your literature searches or within the information that you find. But if not, hopefully this will be useful to you. So before I kind of start talking about some of the biases that I think you need to be aware of, I want to ask you a question. So what do you think are some of the potential biases that might arise when we're searching for scholarly information? So when we're searching for that information, are there any biases, or is there any kind of information from certain groups of people that we might be missing out? What do you think are those biases? And I've put just some prompt questions on the slide there just to kind of get you thinking on this topic. So thinking about who accesses HE, who accesses that postgraduate study, who gets money to fund research, who has the contacts to publish, and who gets promoted. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes just to think about this. And so what do you think are the potential biases that we need to be aware of when we're searching for information? Okay, thanks everybody. Please do continue putting those in the chat, your ideas, because we've got some really good ones there. So yeah, we're mostly going to be seeing papers from English speakers in the West. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And within that, thinking about all kinds of issues to do with EDI, promotion, grants, awards, absolutely. Personal professional experiences, yeah, people's privileges, companies with wanting a certain outcome, government with political agendas, absolutely. The number of Black professors is very low in the UK, and that is definitely an issue about who is getting that, who's getting promoted, who's getting the funding to research. More money goes to biological, neurological, hard science and say intervention work. Yeah, male dominated in some areas, absolutely. Yeah, and we don't always see research that didn't have a positive result. Really well done, thank you everyone. And you're obviously all thinking about these issues, which I think is great that you're already aware of some of these issues, and that we need to be aware of these issues when we're doing our literature searching, because we need to be aware of some of the research that we may be missing, or some of those voices that we might be missing with our research. So just to kind of briefly talk about some of the biases that I think we really should be aware of within when we're doing our literature searching. So the first few is kind of the issues of lack of diversity and racism within the scholarly publication industry. And this is a big problem, and this will affect who can do research and what research gets published. So when we're thinking about those big journals, those leading journals, the leading journal editors are mostly white or from Western or North American countries. And these journal editorial boards really can act as gatekeepers to what gets published in their journals, and can knowingly or unknowingly kind of reinforce that exclusion of underrepresented voices or certain groups of our communities, and will find it more difficult to publish within these journals. So we definitely have to be aware of that. And there's lots of researchers to show that Black researchers receive less funding than white researchers in the UK. And similarly in America, white Americans perform the vast majority of scientific research. So we really need to be aware of how these issues can affect who is actually getting access to that research funding, and who has that ability to access it and actually publish that research, and who isn't able to do that, and whose voices are we missing out when we're doing that literature searching. I think research often focuses on white Western samples, as I think Susanna mentioned at the top, but really focuses on those Western samples, and research has shown that it is harder to get a paper about people of colour published, and it results in more kind of desk rejection from those journal editorial boards. So we need to be aware of these issues when we're searching for information. We may need to start searching additional sources or other places to find some of these voices that we might be missing in those mainstream journals if we are searching kind of Scopus, Web of Science, Medline, and being aware that we might be missing some voices. I think geographical inequality is also a big issue. So we didn't talk about Scopus and Web of Science very much last week, but because we focus on demoing Medline, but Scopus and Web of Science are two of the biggest multidisciplinary databases out there. Most people will search those databases when they're doing a literature search, but actually you need to be aware of that those databases mainly cover journals from North America and Europe, and 95% of the content in Web of Science and Scopus are in the English language. So when you search those databases, don't assume that you're doing a comprehensive literature search. You are doing a comprehensive literature search of English language papers in North America and Europe, but what about all that research in other areas of the world? So it might also other areas that maybe are publishing in English but actually aren't getting into these big mainstream databases. So how do we find that research? And gender inequality, and someone picked up on this in the chat. It still exists in research, unfortunately. Men publish on average more papers than women. And thinking about COVID in the last few years, particularly kind of brought this problem to the forefront, that women's research went down massively during COVID because of the caring responsibilities that they had. And women are much less likely to be listed as first author on papers as well, and they report those similar problems of accessing that research funding compared to male researchers. So there's loads of issues we need to be aware of, and we really want you to think about this. We can't solve these problems when we're doing our literature searching, because they're really systemic problems that need to be tackled, but we're not going to solve them in literature searching, but we need to be aware of the problems, and we need to make that little bit of extra effort to try and find that research from those voices who might not be able to publish in these mainstream databases. This is just quite an interesting visual that we share. This is based on information, based on documents in Scopus from 2017. So it's a little bit old, but I don't think it will have changed that much. And the world is scaled by the number of documents published in Scopus by where their authors are from. And you can see that there's a massive proportion from Europe, North America, China, but can you see what little proportion there is from South America, from the African continent in Web of Science, in Scopus? So how do we hear those voices? How do we hear from those African researchers, those South American researchers? Because their research will just be as good, but that it's not getting into Scopus. So what do we need to do to find that research? So before we go on to talk about how we can mitigate some of those issues, just to pick up on some other biases that some people did pick up on the chat. When we're doing searches on Google, for example, we need to be aware that there are algorithmic biases within within search engines. Search engines and databases are not neutral. They have algorithms that do reinforce issues such as racism, so we need to be aware of that. And if we are searching Google, we may also want to search other search engines as well. Novel research or breakthrough ideas can be resisted. So if you're someone has done some really new novel research that's kind of got a really breakthrough idea, it might be hard to get that published in the journals. You may want to be looking at finding them in conference proceedings instead, so widening your search rather than just journal articles. Just remember that certain disciplines are still underrepresented in some sources. So for example, in Scopus and Web of Science, the large proportion of content in there is STEM. They do have art, social sciences, but it is more focused on STEM disciplines. So if you are searching in art, social sciences, you may want to look into other sources. And someone also put this in the chat about withholding negative results. It's much harder to get something published if it's showing a negative or null result, but those results are still really important to us. So how do we access that? And that might be through grey literature searching or finding information at conference proceedings. So I've told you all these issues, but how can we actually mitigate these issues? How can we make sure we're trying to find that research from marginalised voices, from underrepresented groups? So I'm just going to give you a minute. Have you thought at all about how you might find those voices or overcome these biases within your literature searching? I'm just going to give you a minute just to put some ideas in the chat. Yeah, look on more search engines or resources or databases. Being conscious of databases and how to find wider sources. So yeah, not just English papers. So there's lots of ways we can do this, but basically what we need to do is try and actively seek out those sources that maybe showcase or indexed voices from marginalised voices, from researchers from across the world, particularly thinking about the Global South and how we access their research. Because their research is just as good, it's just it might be harder for them to get their research published in these mainstream databases that we're searching. So trying to actively seek out a wide range of sources and not just searching those mainstream databases, because we know that we will be missing out on certain voices. And there's lots of places that you can search, and I'm going to put a link in the chat here. This is a collection of databases that we've put together that is specifically being put together to help people find sources to search for that really showcase and highlight research produced by those underrepresented groups with a particular focus on the Global South. So please do have a look at this list and see if there's any databases that might be relevant for you. And there's some really good sources on there that will help you find research from across the globe. So please don't just search those mainstream databases. Have a look at these more other databases as well. And the last thing that you can do, and Jen put this in the chat, is search for grey literature. Grey literature is a great way of finding voices from everyone, rather than just those that have been published in the mainstream databases. So I'm hoping that was useful to you. We could talk about this for ages. It's such an important topic, but we felt it's really important to raise these issues within literature searching sessions, because we feel that everyone should be aware of these issues and actively trying to find research from researchers from across the globe and not just certain countries. So I'm going to pass over to Tanya now, because she is actually going to tell you more about grey literature and how you can search it.
Thanks, Sally. It's worth me just saying as well that the issue of trying to search in languages other than English, if that's your only language, as it is for me, is really challenging. And without somebody else on your team who can access those other languages, yeah, we are always going to be missing part of the picture. So I'll talk a bit about grey literature now. And again, this is a topic where we could talk for hours. We could do a whole session or a number of sessions just about grey literature. So I'll try and kind of give you the salient points now, and hopefully kick you off with some ideas about where to go for grey literature. So grey literature is basically any information that is not produced by a commercial publisher. So it tends to relate to all of the kinds of documents that are not coming through publishers that publish journals or books. It's basically anything that's coming out of other sources. It could be from other companies, other organisations. It could be think tanks. It could be charities. It could be governments and so on. It's really important to go beyond the databases, as we've mentioned, to kind of reduce that bias that you get from only looking at the published journal articles, and in an effort to be more comprehensive, so capturing more data that will be relevant to your literature review. Grey literature is not always peer-reviewed, so it doesn't necessarily go through the same workflows and processes that journal articles do in the kind of scholarly publication field. So the quality of the information may be variable, and it's kind of a contradiction sometimes that I find in advising people to search the grey literature, when we also spend time talking to people about making sure that the literature they use is of a reliable standard and is reviewed and of high quality. So there can be a trade-off, but it does depend on your research question as to how much into the grey literature you're going to go. As Sally mentioned, if it's important to your literature, for your literature search, that the results that you're gathering are representative of a population group that is traditionally kind of marginalised, then yes, it's going to be important for you to go out into the grey literature and find, for example, whether it's patient experience data, or if it's trials using samples from the population that you're interested in, rather than relying solely on kind of the white westernized and male populations that we tend to see represented in samples as well. So I've explained that grey literature is any literature, any documentation that isn't coming from a commercial publisher. So with that in mind, can you think of any examples of grey literature that you might want to include in your literature search? And please do type those in the chat. Anything springing to mind that you think would be good to include in your literature search, perhaps? I'll just read a few out. We've got unpublished theses, conference papers, computer package documentation and webbooks, conference documents, conference presentation abstracts, information from charities, survey results from a charity, for example. So these are all really good examples, and yes, they do all fall into the category of grey literature. Some conference papers will be published formally as conference proceedings, so I think they're still grey, but it's a bit of a grey area because they're coming through a publisher. But yes, all of those would be considered grey literature. So you can see now on the slide, yes, Simon, thank you, working papers from, for example, from government departments. So you can see now on the slide, I've just given a very brief list of examples of grey literature. So yes, technical specifications and standards, such as Susanna mentioned in terms of computer program documents or standards and patents and things like that. We've got government and commercial reports, theses, conference proceedings and conference papers, which may be slightly different. We've got social media postings, and I can see Catherine's just put in the chat there about podcasts. I think, yes, other forms of media, such as podcasts, will be considered as grey literature, even though they're audio or visual. Yes, and again, it does depend on what you are, how you are kind of going to use that data, I suppose, whether you would consider it literature or not, or whether it's just for background. We've got trials data. So trials data often makes its way into the published journal literature, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it is just published, for example, by those large pharmaceutical companies, and it also may be held in trials registers as well. So there's lots of different types, and thank you for your contributions in the chat. So you don't have to go through every type of grey literature hunting down, but the ones that are important to your research question, that is the important thing to remember here, because this can seem very overwhelming. But we have on our library website, as you would expect, pulled together some advice on grey literature. Now let me just get that page up on my browser. Thanks, Sally. Sally's just posted the link in the chat, and I will just attempt, if I can. Still a bit new to this platform. I'm just going to share my browser window so that you can see that. Hopefully that's come through to you. So we've got some advice on grey literature, which is reflecting what I'm saying now, but in a little bit more detail.
Tanya, can you just make it a little bit bigger? Is that okay?
I will. Yeah, thank you for that, Sally. Yeah, I'll just zoom in. Hopefully that's a bit better. So we've got some, again, a repeat of what we've just been talking about here, and podcasts is on there. And also down the side, you might be interested in seeing in this section on the library website, there is also some pages to different types of information. So just wanted to highlight theses here, which will give you advice on different sources for searching through theses. And also, if you expand the resources guide here on the side, again, you can see some information about how to search those different types of documentation, some of which would be considered grey literature. Okay, so that is just a source of help and further information for you. So let me go back to the slides, if I can. Okay, so that's what grey literature is, and it's useful for you to think about what different types of grey literature might add for your research question. And as I've said, if you are looking particularly, for example, if you're doing a qualitative review and you're looking for the experiences or views of a particular population, then that's going to be really important in trying to seek out, not only from the journal literature, but also from other types of grey literature, that information. So just a few tips on searching for grey literature. Using different search engines, whether that's different databases, so organised collections of information, or search engines such as Google. Try using some other search engines and sources. So we're so used to using Google and relying on that, but as Stanley said, there is evidence that it is it's programmed in to be biased towards those exactly the same kind of privileged voices as we see in the published literature. So you can try to use some different search engines. It doesn't come naturally to us now, we're all kind of hooked on Google, but there are other search engines out there such as DuckDuckGo or Dogpile, or there's also some meta search engines which are listed on the Grey Literature Search page. In medicine, we've got one called Base, which goes out and searches across lots of different sources of grey literature in the field of health and medicine as well. You can also target relevant organisations, and I think this was mentioned in the chat as well. So if there are think tanks, organisations, agencies, regulatory or professional bodies or charities working in the space that is relevant for your research question, then you can do a hand search of their websites and their publications. They may have their own libraries that you can access physically or digitally to enrich your search. As I've mentioned, you can search databases or library catalogues which contain grey literature, and results from these sources often don't appear in a general web search. And thank you, Susanna. Yes, you do need to be aware in a different way of the biases within think tanks. They may have a political agenda. Absolutely, they may have they may be ideologically driven. Yes, that's a really good point as well. So it may be that you're introducing differently balancing biases. So it's just worth being aware and kind of paying due attention to that when you're searching in grey literature sources. A really powerful thing that is often forgotten in literature searching is consulting with other researchers and experts who are working in the area of your research topic directly, so via email, social media, or academic mailing lists. When doing a really large and comprehensive literature search, it is really good practice to have a consultation with experts in the field. And again, this is a good way of contacting people who are representing, who may have access to the data that you're interested in that hasn't yet been published.
Okay, I'm going to move on now to talking a little bit more about some other search techniques that you might want to think about using in addition to that database search that we did last week and the grey literature search that Tanya has just talked about. We're going to briefly cover these advanced searching techniques. So I'm going to talk about text mining to find additional subject headings and other search terms. Then we'll talk briefly about finding other people's search strategies, because this can be one of the most useful things that you can do to really develop a comprehensive search, is to look at other people's search strategies, especially if they're kind of expert searches that have been developed by experts. We'll talk briefly about search filters, and then the last one, citation searching, is a really useful technique to make sure that your search is really comprehensive. So I'm going to first of all talk a little bit about text mining to help us find additional subject headings and search terms. So if you remember last week, we did a search on Medline and we did a keyword search just for terms in the title or abstract of a paper, but we also did subject heading searches to find those subject headings that are attached to each of our papers, and we can use both keywords and subject headings to make a really comprehensive search. So this is just a way that you can use some tools to make sure that you're finding and you're using all the relevant keywords and all the relevant subject headings. And there's two really useful tools in medicine and health that we want to tell you about. And the first one is PubMed Reminder, and the second one is Mesh on Demand. So PubMed Reminder allows you to put some keywords into a search term, and it then searches those keywords and comes up with a list of key terms, a list of subject headings, and some additional things. So I'm going to demo that in a second. A mesh on demand is a similar thing, but you actually copy and paste, for example, an abstract into the search box, and it then suggests some relevant subject headings. It just makes sure that you're searching and you're using all those search terms and all those subject headings. So first of all, I'm going to demo PubMed Reminder. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so all the information about searching PubMed Reminder, sorry, I found it really hard to say, and Mesh on Demand are in the handout, and the step-by-step instructions with screenshots on how to do it. But I'm going to give you a little demo, and then I'm going to give you a chance to have a go with some of these tools. So this is PubMed Reminder. The link to it is in the handout, but if you just Google PubMed Reminder, you will find it quite soon. It's usually the top one in the list of results. So in PubMed Reminder, it allows us to put a search in. So I'm just going to do a search for articles on end-of-life care and dementia. Okay, so what I need to do is use my speech marks for my phrase end-of-life care. And in PubMed Reminder, we need to use Boolean in capitals. Okay, so remember we talked about PubMed, we talked about Boolean and or last week. We can use that in PubMed Reminder, but we need to use it and put it in capitals. So I'm going to put and dementia. So this is saying I want to find papers. I want PubMed Reminder to analyze papers on end-of-life care and dementia. Okay. So you put your search in here. Don't put a really complicated search in here. Just you maybe use a key term from each of your concepts and combine them. You can build more advanced search, but I find it easier if you just do a kind of a basic keyword search for a couple of your keywords. And then all you need to do is click Start PubMed Reminder. Okay, so basically what it's doing, it's searching PubMed, which is a public version of Medline, and it's analysing those papers. It can take a couple of seconds to do this, especially if it's a large set of papers. And then what it does, it comes back with some information for us. And this looks a little bit overwhelming, but once you understand it, it's quite useful for developing your search strategy. So it's analysed papers in PubMed that match my term, end-of-life care and dementia, and it's analysed those papers and brought me back some information. So this can be quite useful in a number of different ways. So here it's telling me the kinds of journals that these papers are published in. That might be quite useful to you because you might feel, oh, this one is really relevant. Maybe I need to go and check the website and browse the archives of this journal. If you wanted to do a bit of hand searching, so the journals are here. The authors, some of the authors, so obviously this person here, Delians, they have written 64 papers that match my search in PubMed. So you might then want to go and have a further look at these authors to make sure that you're picking up all the papers that they've written on your particular topic. And then here is where we can start seeing the keywords and the subject headings that these papers are using. So these are the keywords that these papers that PubMed is analysing. So it might just be quite useful to you. It might bring you through to some other keywords that you haven't thought about. So, for example, palliative here. Obviously, you would need to include that if you're searching for end-of-life care. Quite a lot of them mention family, which might be quite interesting. You might want to look at it from a family perspective. So have a look at this list of keywords. It may lead you to some other keywords that you may then want to add into your search. And then here is the list of subject headings. So it's analysed these papers, and these are the most used subject headings that have been attached to these papers. So there's a subject heading for dementia, which you would need to use. There's a subject heading for terminal care, which would be really relevant and useful to use. So there's also one for palliative care. So there's actually kind of two subject headings to do with end-of-life care here, terminal care and palliative care. So that's quite useful to know that you need to include those into your search. So it's just quite a useful tool. It's quite nifty. You just put your search terms in, it analyzes those papers and brings you back with some nice text mining analysis here. So that's one of the tools. So that is just basically putting some search terms in. The next tool that I want to mention is Mesh on Demand. So this is slightly different. So this is where you can paste some text, usually an abstract or possibly full text of a paper. So if you have a real key paper that you found, you can paste the text of that key paper into this Mesh on Demand tool, and it will bring back the relevant subject headings. So I've just found this paper here. It's called Dementia Care and End of Life Care, Current Approaches. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the abstract here, and I'm just going to paste it into my the box here. And all you need to do is click on the search button. And it analyzes that text and it suggests the relevant subject headings that it thinks are relevant to this particular paper. So it can just be quite useful. PubMed Reminder is obviously suggesting subject headings as well. So you might not want to use both of these tools, but I just wanted to show you both of them. It's just taking a little bit of time. I did this before, so I'm just going to click on the one that I tried before. So this is exactly the same thing. It's just it's what I did. It's when I prepared earlier in true professional style. So what you can see here is analysed my abstract, and here is where my mesh terms are. Here are my subject headings. So again, it's brought palliative care, terminal care, dementia, caregivers might be relevant, hospices, quality of life. So again, it's just allowing us to find those additional subject headings that we may want to build into our search. Mesh on Demand is slightly harder to find. If you Google Mesh on Demand, it won't come up usually in the results. So the link to it is in the handout, and I will put the link in the chat box now as well, just so you've got it. It's just a little bit trickier to find. So those are the two tools that we wanted to show you. PubMed Reminder, where you just put in some search terms, and Mesh on Demand, where you actually just paste some text from a key paper. Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing there and go back to the slides. In the slides, we have put a short video on using PubMed Reminder. So we've done a little video there just to remind you how to do. Oh, I can't remember if it's our video or we linked to someone else's video. I think it could be someone else's video, but it tells you how to use that. So if you forget, don't worry. But now I want to give you just 10, probably maybe less than 10 minutes. I might give you 5 minutes to start with. I want you to choose either PubMed Reminder or Mesh on Demand. So if you're doing PubMed Reminder, I want you to put some search terms in and see what happens. If your search is too broad, it might say, this is too broad, I can't analyse all those papers, and you might just make it a little bit more focused. Or go on Mesh on Demand if you've already know of a key paper and put an abstract in and see what subject headings are coming up. So this just allows you to find if there's any other keywords or subject headings that you may not have thought about. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes and then we'll see how you're getting on. And if you have any questions, please just pop them in the chat. So the links to those two resources are both in the chat. Tanya linked through to PubMed Reminder, and I've put the link to Mesh on Demand. Okay, I think a few of you have found it really useful. Yeah, I find PubMed Reminder probably more useful because it does everything in one place. But hopefully you found some useful information there. And just in PubMed Reminder, you'll see at the end of some of the columns, so in the journal column, the author column, there's a little blue P. So if you click on that P, it'll open up PubMed and open up those papers within PubMed. So PubMed is a database. It's basically the public version of Medline. So it's freely available. So for example, if you found an author that you're really interested in, if you click on the little P to the right hand side of their name, it will open up their papers within PubMed. Yeah, Simon, it didn't work for me. I'm not totally sure. I'd have to look into that a bit closely. I assumed it hadn't, but it doesn't work. But I did try it and it gave me a bit of a funny error message, so I'd have to find out. Okay, thanks everyone for trying that. Hopefully that's been useful. We just find those tools quite useful when we're developing literature searches, so we wanted to share that with you.
So what I'm going to do next is just walk you through a few more advanced kind of search approaches to capture more relevant information. So we've looked at database searching, we've looked at using some text mining and grey literature. So I'm going to look now at using other people's search strategies. And the reason we're going to introduce this is because looking at published search strategies is a useful way, another useful way of finding keywords and subject headings. You can see how others have structured their search, which can give you an indication of what you might do with your search. And you can also look to see and build on any gaps that they have identified after publishing their search and running a review of the literature. So I wanted to start with a question in case anybody already knew how to go about this. How would you find other people's search strategies? So it looks like a handful of you have already taken this approach before, or have noticed when you've been reading systematic reviews that you will find they often, well, almost always for a systematic review, and often for other types of literature review, will include a search strategy either in an appendix. At the end of the journal article, there will be a link to an appendix, or it may be included in something called supplementary information. So I'm going to just try and share my screen, and I'm going to give you a really quick indication of how to find a search strategy from systematic reviews, for those of you who haven't done this. Okay, so let me just choose my screen to share. So what you can see on your screen here, and I will zoom in a little bit more if I can, is the medicine subject guide, which we showed you last time. And this is where you'll find a list of databases relevant to, in this example, medicine. So one source that's really useful for finding systematic reviews, if you haven't come across it before, is the Cochrane Library. And the Cochrane Library is a fantastic resource where it brings together very high quality systematic reviews on kind of clinical treatment decisions or interventions, alongside trials and economic evaluations and so on. So I would recommend that the Cochrane Library is a good place to go to search for systematic reviews. Let me just open it up because I've already done the search just to save a little bit of time. So again, I'll try and zoom in a bit if that makes it a bit easier for you to see. Okay, so I've done a quick search for end-of-life care in the Cochrane Library. Now, you don't have to put in your whole search strategy when looking for systematic reviews to find some search strategies. You may just be interested in looking at part that you're finding particularly difficult to define in your search strategy. So you can just pop in some brief keywords into the search, and this will bring back a list of Cochrane reviews, and you can see the tabs along the top are different types of documents, and I'm interested in the reviews. So then you can choose one of the results. So all of these are systematic reviews, and in Cochrane they will all have a published search strategy. So I'm going to choose this one here on end-of-life care pathways for improving outcomes in caring for the dying. I've opened it up here. And if you haven't noticed it before, you will find the contents down the side, and in the appendices you will see there is usually a search strategy, and it will tell you which database. So this searched central, which is a Cochrane database. We have Medline and Medline in progress, and you can see the entire search strategy here. And again, this is useful if you're wanting to replicate a search strategy, then that is absolutely fine. If you're wanting to update a search that's already been done, or indeed just to identify some additional keywords and subject headings that you might not have thought of. And indeed, you may encounter some new sources of information that you hadn't considered already. So that can be a really good way of having a look further into the literature and just improving your search strategy. You can do a similar job in Medline. So I've just run a search in Medline. Again, I'll try and zoom in a little bit in Medline because it is tiny. So this is on a different topic completely that we were looking at last week, and I've put in several of my search concepts here on mobile applications, in children, around fruit and vegetable eating, improving nutrition. And what I've done, if you can see in the search, I've combined my search terms together, And then I've used the publication type limit, which you can see down the side here under publication type. I've used the publication type limit for systematic review, and it's returned 1 review for me. I can then use the check at leads button. I always have a heart and mouth moment hoping that this works, and I can go through to the publisher's website. Okay, and again have a look for the full text. So I'm just going to go to the full text. There's a few links to click on this one. Okay, and then there's supplementary information down the side here. So again, I'll try and zoom in a little bit for you so you can see the supplementary information. And they have uploaded a Word document with the search strategy in there, and I can just download this file to have a look at their search strategy. Okay, and then you can have a look at the search strategy and also the sources that they used there and see how many results they returned. Okay, let me just go back to the slides. Yes, thank you, Sally, for reminding me to say that as well. If you are basing your search on another person's search, then you do need to cite it in your own write-up, in your own methods section usually. Also, just be aware if you're using a published search, if you only use part of it, it may not be as efficient as using the whole search, and that's particularly the case for search filters, which I was going to go on to talk about next. So bear with me a second while I get back to my slides. So just to sum up then, you can look for published search strategies. We'd recommend having a look in the Cochrane systematic reviews, or you can identify other systematic reviews, for example, in a Medline search by limiting to using the systematic review publication filter. So we've got 5 minutes now for you to go and have a look. If you haven't done already while I've been talking, there are some instructions in the handout on pages 5 and 6. Go over to Cochrane, or if you prefer a database such as Medline, and see if you can identify a systematic review on your topic or part of your topic, and see if you can find the search strategy. It's worth mentioning that not everybody's search strategy is going to be brilliant. You'll often find that they're missing some really key keywords that you would definitely have included. So not all search strategies are created equal, but those published definitely in Cochrane, I know for sure will be of a really high standard. So yes, have a look and see if there's just see if you are able to do that task. Okay, so we'll just give you 5 minutes.
Just while you're doing that, sorry Tanya, I hope you don't mind me saying, but one other way I do this is just search on Google Scholar, put some keywords in, but make sure I also type systematic review in. I mean, it's not the most foolproof way of doing it, but it can just pick up some key systematic reviews on your topic. So that's just an additional way of doing this as well, in addition to Cochrane and Medline.
I'm just going to bring everybody back now, if that's all right. So hopefully you had a go. Let me just go through. So we've had a look at looking at other people's search strategies, particularly those from systematic reviews. Some of you may have noticed as well that you'll find published literature which include tested search strategies to help you identify literature on specific topics, for example, specific study types such as randomized controlled trials, or a certain type of population, and so on. You'll also find search filters are often built into some of our subject databases. So for example, I've just shown you in Medline using a publication type filter. You can find these filters built into some of the databases, and that's kind of one approach that the information specialists working in those databases will they'll craft a search for you and either publish it or they'll build it into a database search engine. There are a few collections of search filters, so these are useful because they are kind of tested. They'll usually be tested in 3 different ways. One to provide the most sensitive or comprehensive set of results, so to try to capture everything. They'll also be tested for their precision, so to get a balance of the most relevant number of results, so where as many of the results are relevant as possible and the least number of irrelevant results, and that can also be called specificity. Okay, so these will be tested by information specialist groups. There's some links on the slides and I think in the handout as well to some of the places that you can go to look for search filters. I don't need to show you them, I don't think, just yet, but what you'll generally find is there'll be a link to a published journal article where they have given a narrative and an explanation of how they tested the search strategy. Thanks, Sally, for posting in the chat. And they will also often just give you a Word document with the search strategy presented in the database kind of format that we've seen just now when looking at published systematic reviews. And you can, again, if you choose to use a published filter, you'll need to cite it and say where you got it from. The published search filters, in contrast to the systematic review filters, the published search filters will need to be used in their entirety to have the effect that they intended to have. So if somebody's designed a search filter and said this will achieve 95% sensitivity, and you want to get that same level, then you're going to have to use the whole search filter. You can't just pick and choose elements as you've been doing perhaps from looking at other people's search strategies. Okay, so that was just a mention really of search filters. I wanted to talk a bit more now about citation searching. So citation searching is useful because it helps you find out who has cited a paper. You can find out more papers on a similar subject and see how the idea has developed over time. And it can also be really useful for niche topics or topic where not much has been published, and you can follow a kind of a conversation or a breadcrumb through the literature. So it's quite different to the kind of very systematized searching that we've been talking about up until now. But certainly for difficult to find literature, citation searching is really, really powerful. So I didn't explain exactly what I meant by citation searching just now, so I'll do that. So citation searching is using a key paper, so a highly relevant and important paper for your research topic, and using that as a starting point for looking backwards in the literature, so which papers that paper cited, and looking forwards in the literature, so which papers cited back to that key paper that you're interested in. Okay, so I'll just pose a question first to see if anybody in the room knows, and maybe Simon, don't answer because I know you've got prior knowledge. So what tools do you use for citation searching? If indeed you know of any tools that can do this kind of thing. Okay, that's fine. So Web of Science is a good one, and I will show you that one in a second. So we have, there are 3 citation searching tools that I would tend to use. There are other pieces of software that can do this as well, but in terms of databases and tools that are readily available to you through our subscriptions or for free, these are just 3 I wanted to mention today. So we have Web of Science, Scopus, and Google Scholar. And these are 3 kind of search engines or databases which capture citation information and make it easily accessible for you to go forwards into the literature and find who cited the paper that you're interested in. So I'm just going to give you a quick, I'm just going to show them to you actually just now. I'm not going to give you a massively long demonstration. So let me just again switch over to my browser. So the first one I'll show you, if that's come through okay, and I'll zoom in a little bit. This is Web of Science, and as we mentioned last week, you can access all of the databases from the library website, and you can use the subject listing here for your topic area, or you can use the library catalogue to locate a database such as Web of Science. So I've gone into Web of Science and I've put in the title of of a journal article that I already know about that I think is so important for my topic. I'd consider it a key paper. So I want to use that as what we might call a citation pearl. Okay, so we put that in, and in Web of Science, we can see that is the paper I'm interested in. And over at the side here, you can see it says citations and references. So the citations are links through to papers that cite this one by Whitaker. And references are all of the papers that Whitaker and colleagues cited when they were writing this paper. So I can click on the 147 citations and look through this list of 147 articles, and that will give me more articles to look at. Now, not every single one of them is going to be relevant because people cite for many different reasons. Another small caveat is with citation searching, very new papers will have very few citations because they haven't had the time to accrue citations. But citation searching is considered to be good practice, especially if you're finding very little through your database searching. So that's Web of Science. So the process is searching for the title of a paper and then using the citations number to click through to the list of citing papers. In Scopus, again, you can go to Scopus from the library website. I've done exactly the same thing. I've looked for my document by Whitaker, so mobile phone text messaging. Again, I'll just zoom in a little bit there for you. And in Scopus, you'll see that we have 112 citing papers, which is slightly different from Web of Science, but the process is the same. I can click on the link and I will get a list of all of the papers that cite this one. Now, you might want to have a think about why the numbers will be different in different sources. Some of you might have ideas about that, but I'll mention that in a second. If you don't, feel free to share in the chat if you do. So we've got a different number of citing papers in Scopus. And then finally, in Google Scholar, I have done the same search, and this has retrieved 224 citing papers. Okay. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about why the numbers might be different. It's only looking within its own database, and each database will differ in terms of the coverage. So it can only capture the citation information for the papers that are included in the database. So Web of Science and Scopus have different coverage. They've got a lot of overlap, but they've got different coverage. And when it comes to something like Google Scholar, it's using web scraping technology to pick up on bibliographic information. So you'll pretty much always find more results from Google Scholar. Sometimes that's a great thing because it will often capture references from grey literature sources. But it can also be a bit of a downside because you'll find all sorts of irrelevant document types in there. And I mean, I've found things referenced from kind of menus from university websites and all sorts of nonsense in there. So Google Scholar is not quality checked in the same way as the other databases, but its coverage is bigger. Okay, so that's a little bit on citation searching. Well worth doing if you're struggling to find any information but maybe one or two key papers.
Okay, thanks Tanya. So once you've developed your search strategy, so you may have gone to Medline, developed your search strategy using keywords, using subject headings, and you're happy with your search, you've gone through it, you've looked at some key papers, you may have used PubMed Reminder, find some additional terms, added those in, and you're happy with your search. Now you need to run that search in different databases. And unfortunately for all of us, we can't just copy and paste our Medline search into the other databases because all of the databases use slightly different things like different proximity operators, different search fields, and they have different subject headings. So basically I'm not going to tell you how to do a search in every single database because I can't do that. You'll be all searching different databases. But this really is just to flag with you that when you do start doing that translation, you will just need to do a little bit of work and understand how to search each of the databases. So on the slide here, you will see that I've done an example search in Medline for the word non-surgical within 3 words of treatment, And I've actually used the TWKW, which is actually the text word field, which is what we used last week, which is the title abstract. But I've also added the keyword field here. So it'll search, this search is searching for any papers that have the phrase non-surgical within 3 words of treatment in the title, abstract, or keyword field. So that will work in Medline. But when we go into the other databases, it will be slightly different. So for example, within CINAHL, when the next database down, so this is one of the biggest nursing and allied health databases, you can see that the proximity operator has changed from ADJ to N. And we're actually searching in CINAHL, you would choose from a drop-down box to which field you search. So the TX field is title, is all fields actually. TX field is all fields, so it'll search all fields in CINAHL, non-surgical within 3 words of treatment. So as you can see, Cochrane, slightly different again. Instead of ADJ or N, it's near / and then the number. And again, the fields are slightly different in Cochrane. In Cochrane, again, you choose from a drop-down box. PsycInfo is an Ovid database, so actually that is the same as Medline, but the subject headings will be different. So subject headings in Medline are different to subject headings in PsycInfo. They're different to subject headings in Embase, for example. Web of Science, you can see again, different proximity operators. In this time, you search topic field, and similarly with Scopus, it's a W instead of an N or an EAR or an ADJ. And we've been searching the title, abstract, and keyword field. So you're not going to remember all of these, and I do not remember all of these. What you need to do when you go to each database, just have a quick search in the help pages of that database. Search for proximity operators, and it will bring up how you actually search and what kind of fields are available, how to search proximity, and also things like phrase searching or wildcards, truncation. Sometimes it's a bit different in all of the databases, so just have a look at the help pages and it should tell you. But if you have any problems, you're not quite sure how to do something and you can't find the information on the help pages, please do let us know, because we're more than happy to offer advice on searching specific databases. We might have to just go and have a look and dig around as well, because we might not know the answer, but we can certainly help you. But just to flag, you can't just copy and paste your Medline search into the other databases. It won't work. Or it might do something. It might find some papers, but it won't be doing what you're hoping it will be doing. We have made a little video on how to translate Medline into Embase. So it takes you step by step through how to find the relevant subject headings. And it's just a short video that we've made. So the link is on the slides, but there's also a link to a video made by someone else that shows you how to translate Medline into Cochrane. So it takes a bit of getting used to, but once you've done one, you'll get used to just recognizing where you might have to make some changes. Does anyone have any questions about translating searches at the moment? You won't be up to that stage yet, but just to flag, when you do get to that stage where you're happy with your Medline search or wherever you've developed your search, you will just need to have a think about translating that search into the other databases. But yeah, if you have any questions when you get to that stage, please do drop us an email. I am going to hand over back to Tanya now just to talk about evaluating and testing your search, and then I'll come back in with the search methods text at the end.
Thanks, Sally. I was just going to say, do you want to jump straight through to the bit at the end now, and then I'll come back to this bit?
Yeah, sure, I can definitely do that. So search methods text. So we'll just go on to that now. So this is basically telling, if you're publishing your research, this is telling the reader how you've done your searching. So providing search methods text really helps us to make our research more transparent, so it's really clear to people how we have done our searching, and also more reproducible. So if someone wanted to reproduce our search, all the information that they would need is there in the search methods text. So we really encourage you, even if you're not asked to provide this, I think it's really good practice to say how you've done your searching and where you've done your searching. So the types of information that we would use or include in search methods text, again, it completely depends where you're publishing this, but the names of the databases that you've searched and which provider you access them through. So for example, Medline Medline is available through quite a number of different providers. So Ovid provides access to Medline. So it's quite good practice to say the database and actually the provider or the company who or the interface that we've used to access that. So for example, Medline in Ovid or Web of Science and by Thomson Reuters, they are the company that gives us Web of Science. The platform that we use it for anyway. Tell us if you've done any grey literature searching and any citation searching that you've carried out. It's good practice to tell us when you have carried out your searches, because that's quite useful, because if a researcher came to you and said, oh, I've read your paper and you missed out this key bit of research, you can go back and check when you carried out your research, and it might be that that paper was published after you did your searches, so you can say, oh, actually that isn't included in my research because this is the date that I carried out my search, and that research paper was published after that specific date. So it's really useful to let people know when you carried them out. Any search limits that you applied, so if you searched limited by language, or if you had a date range, anything like that, pop that on there as well. If you contacted any individuals or organisations, and any sources that you hand search. So when we say hand search, now we mean if there's a specific journal that you know is relevant to you and you go to their web page and browse their archives, that's what we would call hand searching. So back in the day, you would come into a library and you would search the journal's archives, but mostly journal archives are available on the website, so you can just do that electronically. So you wouldn't necessarily say how you wouldn't say, oh, I went on PubMed Reminder and developed my search strategy that way, but you would tell us where you searched and how you searched, when you searched it, and any limits that you put on. I've put some examples of search methods text in the slides, but one of the key places to look is at a Cochrane review. So Tanya showed you earlier how to find the search strategies in Cochrane reviews. That was in the appendices section. If you look in the methods section, it will also tell you provide search methods text, so that can be quite useful to have a look just to get an example. But I've also put links to two journal articles here that aren't Cochrane reviews that also include search methods text in there. The key thing about search methods text is that you need to know how you did your search. So you need to save your searches. You need to record when you did it. You need to record the actual search strategies that you used. If you did citation searches, where did you do your citation searching? You need to record all that. So when you do come to writing your search methods text, you have that information all easily available to you, and you don't have to try and just remember what you did. So just keep a record of everything. So if you do have to provide search methods text, you have that information available to you. Okay, I will now pass on to Tanya to talk about evaluating your search.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks for jumping in and doing that bit. I just thought it was kind of, yeah, it was timely to do it there. So wanted to just talk, say a few things about evaluating your search. So as you're developing your search, you'll find that this is an iterative process. You kind of, you develop a part of the search, you try it out in a database, you have a look at the results, and decide on kind of whether it's capturing a good level of relevant papers or whether it isn't, and you need to revise your search. So it is iterative and it can be messy at the beginning, but you will reach a point where you feel this is capturing a good set of results that you feel is comprehensive, having gone through an iterative process. You may find, as Sally said at the very beginning of the session, that you start broad and you need to narrow, or you may find that actually you start quite narrow and you find very, very little, and so you need to broaden. And broadening can be broadening the topic. It can be removing one of the concepts from your search to allow you to then find a larger set of results to screen through. And there's lots of different ways to broaden and narrow. Narrowing is either using more specific terminology or adding another concept to your search to kind of get a narrower set of results that are more highly relevant. It's a useful technique as well when evaluating your search strategy is to see whether your final set of results, when you've almost settled on your search, as you've been looking through your search results, you may have picked out a handful of key papers that really strongly meet your research question and your inclusion criteria. So it's worth making a note of these key papers, these absolute gems, maybe the same ones that you've used in your citation searching. And it's useful to then combine that with your search strategy to test whether your search picks up this key paper. Okay, so to test key papers in your final set of results, the instructions are on page 6. It says page 6, but I actually think they might be on a different page, Sally, if I'm honest. I think testing the search strategy is on page 9 and 10. So apologies for that. I should have checked that before the session. But it's in the handout. There's a section on testing your search strategy. We have also made a video, but essentially what you need to do is run your search, your whole search strategy, and then you run another line of the search, which is looking for the title of a key paper, and then you combine those two together with and we would expect that if the paper is in the database that you're looking in, when you do that, when you combine with you will have one result, which is that key paper. So you've combined your search strategy with a search for the key paper, and when you combine with it will return that result. If you combine it with and it doesn't return the result, then it means that your search is not picking up that key paper. Now that could be that you're missing some keywords or subject headings, or it could be that key paper isn't in the database. So that's the first thing to check, is to see if that paper is in the database to begin with. But there are some really great instructions on how to do that kind of testing. So it's worth doing towards the end when you feel quite settled, just to test your search to see if it's gathering those key papers. Now, do bear in mind that if you're searching lots of different databases, not every paper will be in every database. So you do need to check first if that paper is in that database, because you may be worrying unduly if it's not being picked up by your search. If, for example, it's only in PsycInfo and not in Medline. I also wanted to point out that we have a literature searching checklist, which again is linked from the slide there, and if I can, I will just share my screen to show it. Did you want to come in, Sally?
I've just put the link in the chat for that.
Oh, brilliant! Thank you. Yeah, so the template is there's a template in the chat, and there's also the literature searching checklist. Is that what you've put in the chat, Sally, or do you want me to? Oh, you put that in.
I've just put the link to the literature searching checklist in the chat as well.
Brilliant. So it might be better, rather than me sharing the screen, if you can click on that link and have a look. But it just gives you a checklist of all of the things that we've been talking about. You know, have you broken your search question down? Have you identified relevant keywords and synonyms? Have you considered alternative spellings? And so on and so on and so on, and that will give you kind of a list of things to work through to make a really high quality and relevant search strategy. Sally, is there anything else that you would like to add that you think I've missed, or I want to pick up on anything that you've spotted in the chat?
I think just to really emphasise, please use the literature searching checklist, because you know, if you're sending your search strategy through to us for feedback, please make sure that you've just worked through this checklist before you send it through to us, because what we would normally do is kind of use a similar list like this and look at your literature search and say, oh, you've forgotten to do this, you've forgotten to do that. So if you could work through that checklist first, if you do send your search strategy through to us, it's just a really useful document just to kind of remind you everything that you should be doing in your search.
Great, thank you. We've been through the search methods text. So, Sally, did you want to do this bit?
Yeah, I can do this bit. Thanks, Tanya. So we've come towards the end of the session now, and I guess what we want you to do after the session is review that search plan that you developed after session 1. So that search plan that you uploaded to the Padlet, or you may have done it and not uploaded it to the Padlet yet. Just have a review of that and try and improve that search based on some of these techniques that we've talked about today. So have you done a PubMed Reminder search? Have you identified some additional keywords or subject headings? So add those into your search plan. How are you going to do citation searching if you are going to do it? Where you're going to search in terms of citation searching. So have a look at our grey literature pages and add that into your search plan. Make sure that you've got that, that key list of databases there into your search plan. And also, thinking back to the beginning of today's session, really do encourage you to try and think about those biases that we talked about and how you might overcome those biases in your search. And you might not be able to, but maybe it's appropriate to acknowledge that within your research and say, I'm aware of these, but I've tried to mitigate them, but it's not possible. As Tanya said with the English language documents, if you can't read or speak other languages, it's very difficult to incorporate that into your research. But I think it's good to acknowledge that issue. Evaluate and test your search, as Tanya talked about. Watch that little video about how to test that your key papers are in your search. And please use that literature searching checklist, because we developed that just for everyone to remind everyone all the key aspects that you should be incorporating within your search. So after today's session, if you need support, I've put a link to the literature searching web pages on our library website. A lot of the content that we've covered in the last 2 sessions is on there. But we are also more than happy to give you feedback on your search strategy. So we'll have a look at the search strategies on the Padlet. It might be towards the end of the week that we can put those comments on there, but we will try our very best to do that. And then you can contact us after today's session by emailing this email address here. This will come through to our team and it will get sent to the appropriate person in the team. So please do contact us afterwards. I'm going to just share an evaluation form, which I have not put on the slides. That's my mistake, sorry. So I'm just going to get that now, and because I would really appreciate your feedback on today's and last week's session. So I'm just going to get the link now and I'm posting it in the chat. So that should take you through to the literature, to the evaluation form for our workshop. So if you've got 2 minutes, please just fill that in. We really appreciate your feedback about today's and last week's session. But yeah, if you need any help from us after today's session, please do drop us an email and we can support you. But thank you for coming to the sessions and engaging with us and answering all our questions. It's been really nice to meet you all and possibly meet you at some point on campus soon.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I hope that was useful. Just want to reiterate what Sally said. It's always really valuable when you leave your feedback for us. So very happy to receive that, your honest feedback on the form, and look forward to meeting you, as Sally says.